I guess, since it is called Blazing Ahead, I would like to ask you whether you had a pivotal moment or a slow burn to get to where you are today. And what made you realize that this is the path that you want to be on?
Thank you. First of all, thanks for having us here. This is my first Dhaka Lit Fest, and it's so exciting to meet everyone. And this is also the first time I'm doing, like, meeting everyone in public in Bangladesh. So I'm so excited to be here. Yeah, I think a very pivotal moment in my life was, I was born and brought up in Melbourne, and was growing up in a very small corner of the earth in the 80s and 90s, and I didn't really see anyone who looked like me or sounded like me. And I think a pivotal moment or a time that it sort of dawned upon me that I wanted to change that is when my kids were growing up. Having a very young daughter and a teenage son, I think especially in COVID, it sort of hit me that if my generation, and as part of the Bengali diaspora and the Bangladeshi diaspora living outside Bangladesh, if my generation doesn't do it, then it's not going to happen. So I think it was like taking that ownership and realizing that responsibility, and that was probably a really pivotal moment for me.
I think mine happened a little bit younger. There's a reason why I come out on stage with a stuffed dog on my shoulder. I'm not crazy, although you might think I am. I think a lot of people do think I am. But this dog is a character from the Tintin comic books. Has anybody read the Tintin comic books or seen the movies? Yeah? So I'm very lucky and blessed. I grew up in East London, and I was blessed enough to be born to a mother who took me to the library every single Friday, no matter what happened, rain, shine, sleet, snow, we'd always go. Because in the books that I was reading, the books that I got from the library that I was reading,
in food, which is my entire world, but the unlikely heroes being dishes that we see sort of unrepresented, and that don't have visibility and don't really have the space, although they're extremely delicious. So the event that you were talking about last year in 2021 in March, I had a 6-course degustation, and it was my first program in Bangladesh. And I was working with an excellent team of chefs in the West End in Prego, and we had worked for months. This was with the DBF, the Durjoy Bangladesh Art Foundation, to procure this menu, and we were bringing luxury ingredients from all over the world. We had fagua and sort of osbugo and yellowtail himachi. But when I asked the chefs if we can get some lau, and if we can get kamranga, and then one of my signature dishes, which was the love letter to Bangladesh, which was my pan ice cream, they were just sort of baffled, and they're like, 15 বছর ওয়েস্টিনে 15 বছরের ভিতরে প্রথম আমাদের কিচেনে লাউ দেখলাম। And if you've been to West End or Prego, we were working in a sort of beautiful part of the city with like central Dhaka, and they have floor-to-ceiling windows, and you look outside and you can see all of Dhaka sprawled out in front of you. And I thought, just think about where we are. We're in, one of the most dynamic cities in the world. We have such a wonderful array of ingredients. We're the biggest delta in the world. We have over 600 rivers, and just the produce that's available to us. We are so spoiled for choice in this part of the world, but in Bangladesh especially, for the amount of seafood, and then just the weather as well, and bordering on Southeast Asia, and then having Indian and Mughlai and ancient sort of Persian cuisine. Just, it baffles me as a chef, probably looking at it from the outside, why we don't value our own food and our own culture and take more ownership of our own identity. If we really look at heritage and luxury and how to live, I think probably with bias or unbiased, we set the standards a very, very long time ago. If we go back to our ancient culture and history and heritage and traditions, this part of the world really knows how to live. So why is it when I make something as simple and honest as Pantabhat at a MasterChef Grand Finale, it just seems so shocking to everyone? Or when I ask for lao at an international chain like Westin, right here in the middle of Dhaka City, that chefs are shocked. I think part of what I do is to tell those stories through food. That's my medium, and that's how I sort of really talk about who I am and bring dishes that we have that is underrepresented to the forefront, and give that a platform and give that a stage. And in that way, having food as my medium of storytelling is some way of expressing myself, of not being seen or heard for a very long time. And it's been amazing being able to bring that and possibly inspire or show other people and encourage other people to bring that out of themselves as well, whether that's in food or literature or whatever your medium is, and whatever makes you happy and brings you joy, to be very authentic to yourself and never have to try and be someone else.
Yeah, I love that you keep using this word authentic, because when we're doing storytelling, and I'm sure you've heard this as well, Anjali, that essentially as writers, we all just basically write the same thing over and over again. It's the same story, really. But how you write it, and whether or not you're authentic to your narrative voice and what point you're trying to bring across, people will either decide to read it or not read it. And I love that you keep using that word, because I think for both of you, there is a sense of being authentic. And what is interesting is that whenever we think about making it on a global level, we look at it from very much a Western point of view, and that's not authentic to us. Even if you see the panel today, we all have the same origin, but the three of us have very different narratives to say, which is why we look different, which is why we talk different, right? But once you make it to a global level, I've noticed that people try very hard to then peg you down into an identity. And I find that, I guess, amusing, a little frustrating too. I'm sure you find it frustrating. I want to talk a little bit about that as well. You had mentioned that when you came into the public eye, there was debate on whether you were Bangladeshi because your father's from Bikrampur, or whether you're Indian because your mother's from Kolkata. And I think you said that puzzled you because you'd never really thought about that at all, because you're born and raised in Australia. So I was wondering if you would tell us a little bit about how that has, I guess, seasoned your path, decisions right now.
I'm going to make a really bad dad joke, and I say it's really seasoned my food. Having Epar or Par Bangla influences in my life, I was very, very lucky to have a father who's a really fantastic cook. And he used to cook on a day-to-day basis, just as my mum did. I guess the labor of cooking, we always had my father and mother both cooking, and so Abu would make very hearty dishes from his Bangladeshi heritage, and so Abu would make things like tehari, kachi biryani, paya, nihari. Like if you think about those very hearty, soulful dishes, that was my dad's jam. And my mother, coming from Bardhaman in Kolkata, she was the very, very delicate, beautiful, elegant cook. From her, we sort of, she was harder on us in just the way we cut potatoes or prepped a particular dish, but she was the one who really installed the beauty and the refinement of Bengali cuisine in us. So I was very lucky to have both of those influences, and I think more than just questioning my identity as a Bangladeshi or an Indian, I very much identify as an Australian. I think it's really important to say that, because until I say I'm an Australian and a very, very proud Bengali Australian, it doesn't let my children really fit in or take ownership of the land that they were born in. And I was born in Australia, but there is in no way denying that someone who looks like this and sounds like this and eats like this is actually an Australian. And it's taken me a long time to really own that statement in itself. But what I will say, something else that gets debated is the food that I cook. I can post something and say this is a particular dish, and I will always have comments saying this is a Kolkata dish, or this is from this region, or this is Bangladeshi, this is not Indian, and there will be a lot of debate going on in my comment section in my socials, and I just have mostly have one sort of answer or statement to that is Bangladesh is 50 years old, and the dishes that I'm cooking and that I often cook are hundreds of years old. So how can the dishes that I cook have any geographical or geopolitical identity? I'm a Bengali, I cook Bengali food, and I cook food that I grew up with. Thank you. And I think it's important, I say this a lot, food lets us have conversations that are often difficult to have. Those very hard conversations, sometimes when you sit with food, it really bridges that divide. It could be between a Bangladeshi and an Indian. It could be between someone who doesn't speak your language. I travel all over the world, and once I share food, even if there's a language barrier, you've shared something and understood something about someone who's offered their plate of food to you or opened their home to you. So for me, I think food is something that we should use to bridge our differences rather than divide us further.
Very nicely said. I think I call it the shop janta syndrome, right? Shop kichu jane, so they have to comment. So sometimes they tell you how to live your own life better than you know. But sometimes I think it is important to put a peg on it, and I want to come to Anjali, who had this. You had an experience where when you were 6 or 7, this boy kept calling you Paki, and you weren't sure what that meant, and then when you did realize that he's calling you Pakistani, you yelled out to him, I'm not Pakistani, Dumbo, I'm Bangladeshi. But you are raised in London, and so let's deconstruct that, shall we?
This is like a therapy session. Yeah,
it's a very public one.
Yeah, it's just very public. Hello, therapist. So yeah, that happened outside the school gates, and he was saying it for days on end. And I remember even seeing graffiti, go home, back in all this kind of stuff. And it just confused me, because I was like, wait a minute, my friend, at school is from India, the other one's, from a Sikh community somewhere up in Singapore. We had children from all over the world in my school, and the fact that every Asian kid would get labelled this by certain communities at school was just really confusing. So yeah, the only thing I could really say was, get a world map, guys, because that is not where I'm from. And also learn to use your ears, because you're obviously not listening. But, there were children who, just didn't know better, and I hope that they do now, so fingers crossed.
Yeah, it's, I remember when we were in university and it was rapid wars there, and we were called Scots, and I didn't even understand that. So I think this idea that on the one hand they say it's a global world, everybody is equal, but then at some point the color of your skin kicks in.
Everything else on top of that as well, not just the color of your skin, but I'm also visibly Muslim. So we have so many terms that are linked to that, and the way the media might portray the Islamic world or so-called Islamic worlds, whatever it is, you are labelled with everything. I remember reading something very interesting about another author who was black and was asked a lot of kind of black questions as to where do you come from and and all this stuff. And he just said, I cannot represent 6 billion other people to you. I am just myself, and I also am learning myself. So I think if you're a woman on top of that, and you're a woman of colour, and then you're a woman who's visibly of any faith, you just have all of these layers and people trying to peg you into these little holes. And it's really exhausting, and sometimes it can be quite frustrating, but you just, I don't know, you rise above it and you try and bash your way through. And I think sometimes walking out with a dog on stage confuses people, and then they start to ask you questions, which is great. So it's, yeah, just trying to get people to open their eyes as to your character and to yourself, not what you might represent to them. And I think it's always frustrating as a person of colour that you are seen as only that, and that you're not an individual. And that's the luxury and the entitlement that people who do not look like us have, which they might not understand we don't have, and we're still fighting for.
I'd love for you to talk a little bit more on why you called him out on that.
In short, I was just tired.
Yeah, it's the same old battle.
Yeah, I was just tired. I think it was like, if I can explain the day, or if I can explain the last 40 years of my life, it probably in that moment. I was an ambassador for the T20 World Cup cricket, and I was cooking in very, very exciting spaces. It's a wonderful role to have, and I think I'm the first person of Bangladeshi descent to be in that space. And it's, but even as an Australian master chef, it's a very exciting space to be in, jumping on and off planes. I went to see the Bangladeshi team play India in Adelaide when it got rained in. They should have won the match. Yes. And then I was cooking in the MCG, which was very exciting. It's like, these are all career highlights. Like, no matter where you are as a chef, you sort of still pinch yourself and you're like, I'm cooking in the MCG, and then I was one of the headliners for the grand finals. I was doing the grand final weekend, and so as you can imagine, being a chef in that, being the head chef in that situation, you have 100 things going on. And I think we're in Adelaide, met Aaron Finch, who was just so lovely. And then Shakib as well, and we spent a couple of really lovely days together. And just to come home, and it's still you, and get on your phone, and it was the straw that broke the camel's back. And there was this young doctor, I think he used doctor in his title on his Facebook page, said something along the lines of, look at her standing next to Aaron Finch. Saqib is such a gentleman because they're sitting apart. And I think I was just super tired, and I was just like, this is ridiculous. But it really, and so I screenshotted the comment, and I just sort of called it out, and I said, above and beyond everything else, and my husband is here, Aaron Finch, thank you. Aaron Finch came and asked to take a photo with me. We stood next to each other and took a photo, and we had lunch with Saqib. But it was just, with everything else going on at that time, I thought, this has got to be the last thing I need to deal with. Come on, celebrate my victories. Like, look at what's happening here. This is just such a wonderful moment in time. And I know there are kids in the room, but I was sick of the bullshit. Like, I was really, really just sick of the bullshit. And it's not that this was the first time that it had happened, and this is not the first time, you know, you ignore comments online. I think what was dangerous in this situation, and why it was this particular comment that sort of catapulted into what it became, was because this is someone of immense privilege. This is someone who lives in Dhaka, who has access to education, who has access to a wealth, to a certain degree. It is expensive to become a doctor in this country and to study medicine. And it's very scary that this is someone of the next generation who's going to go on to advise women on their health and look at their bodies, and that's literally his job. And if he has an issue with how a woman or anyone stands next to each other, or is brave enough to comment on something like that, and in that moment, or in my role, I've never really stopped to think about whether I'm a feminist or where my values lie, or I'm just someone who exists in my role. I do what I do. I've never really stopped to really let it sink in that I'm a woman standing here. I just think of myself as a chef. I have a job, I do my job, I have these platforms, I work in the spaces that I'm invited in, and I feel so lucky to have the roles and the titles that I do. And I don't think if it was a male chef or a male person in my place that comment would have been made. So yes, it's always just that one tiny little battle and fighting those very fine lines, because after working, I guess, 14, 16-hour days and throwing yourself into your work, throwing yourself into things that matter, the last thing that anyone needs, male, female, or however you identify, is to be abused online for just doing your job. Yeah. So it's something that we do all the time. It's the makeup of who we are. Find pleasure in food, whether it's growing ingredients or making a quick sandwich, and I think that sparks a lot of joy.
Lovely, yeah. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to open up the floor for questions from the audience.
Hi, Anjali. Let me just say to Kishwar first that I have probably cried in every episode with you.
Me too.
I think I have watched your audition episode like 3, 4, 5 times, and I cried every time. So it means a lot. And Anjali, the moment you came out with the dog and your shoulder, and I knew you are a very cool person.
So did it make you cry?
But you made me smile. It's very hard to be an adult and owning your own personality. It means a lot. So thank you. My question is one thing that resonated with me very much when you said the sexism thing, that it exhausts us, especially if you're a young girl living in Dhaka. Every step you take, it's exhausting. The constant staring, the constant comment. So what I want to ask, both of you are public figures, and it's very hard when you are an immigrant and you have sort of a different life than us, and yet I see, especially the incident Kishwar mentioned, that it's our own people who are our harshest critic. How does it feel? Like, how do you keep up with it? Or mentally, how do you keep yourself strong enough to go on after when your own people who are supposed to be proud of you, are insulting you, bullying you for something basic as who you are as a woman, and you're doing so much, and instead of gratitude, they are bullying you. So I just want to know, how do you keep yourself mentally strong enough to go on after all this? Thank you.
So there are, I guess it's a very, there's those days when there's that day that was very individual, but like, don't forget that this is a very long battle and it's very systematic. I work in an extremely male-dominated industry, and in Southeast Asia, that's more amplified, where you don't see women in kitchens, and you see women in hospitality, but you don't see them, you see women in front of house, and you don't see women in kitchens as often. And if you do see women in kitchens, you certainly don't see women as head chefs. So that systematic sexism, it is a much bigger problem. To talk about the future and talk about solutions of that, I'm part of this, I'm on the board of the Chefs Association of Bangladesh, and we talk about providing security for women in kitchens, and leading back to the statement that I made that no country can thrive if half its population feels bullied or objectified. It is to create safe spaces. It's not just, this is not a women's issue, this is not a women's battle. You will miss out on 50% of the minds in this country, you'll miss out on 50% of your workforce, and you'll miss out on 50% of the talent if men and people who are in power, whether that's women or men, are not really tapping into the full potential of everyone who's sitting here in this room. This is not a something that women can go ahead and change, and it's also not the responsibility of every woman standing at the top trying to change it from the top down. I am very, very lucky to say I travel and cook in very privileged, amazing spaces across the world. There are times when I'm the only woman in the room, and there are times when I'm oftentimes, too often times, where I'm the only person of color in the room as well.
Everything she said. Plus, it's a really interesting question that you asked, how do you stay strong? Because it's hard, it breaks you every day. And there's a battle you fight every day. And as you said, every step you take feels like just another struggle. And it's something that men are lucky enough not to have to feel, which is why they don't understand when we tell them that we're going through this. My two things to you are to say, you are not alone. Every single woman in the world will somehow feel something that you've been through, so unite. We do have to unite our voices, and sadly we have a lot of people who will pick a different fight from within the feminist circle. We're beyond that. We need to get to the basics. So talk, get new groups going. I know that you're part of amazing herstory units, so that's just going to help you so much. So fellowship between women of all kinds. We all go through the same thing. Doesn't matter our skin colour, doesn't matter where we're coming from, how rich or poor we are. We feel that oppression daily. So unite. And number two, staying strong. Do whatever it takes, whether it's watching a 16-hour episode series on Netflix, get crying into a box of tissues and chocolates, whatever it takes.
Watch my audition tape and have another cry.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. But anything that rejuvenates you and strengthens you and gives you a moment of peace within your mind where you can reset yourself is crucial. And as women, we don't take it because we're too worried about feeding everyone else, making sure everyone else is okay. So taking those few moments for yourself to rejuvenate and replug and rewire and re-strengthen yourself, whatever form that might be, is crucial. So make that your number one priority. You are your number one priority, and make sure everyone else around you, whether it's male or female, knows that.
Second row.
Thank you very much. I guess I grew up in Britain, and Anjali, your books are in my house. Actually, my kids read them, so thank you very much for doing them. My question to you is this: that in Britain, as you know, that we as Muslims not only face colored racism, but also structural racism in terms of being a Muslim. So a hijabi being an author, how did you handle that, especially when it comes to the kind of literature and the way our children are portrayed, the prevent strategy and things like that? I'm a civil servant in the UK, so it'll be interesting to hear that.
How do I overcome that? First of all, I try not to make it into the issue in the room. So as you will notice in all my books, I'm speaking about a certain issue from a different angle. And I was very aware going into this that I didn't want to write about just a Muslim issue or do it from just a Muslim perspective, which is why I get a lot of questions like, why aren't they Muslim, why aren't they Bengali? No, I want to write from all sorts of stories. White people get to do it, I don't see why I shouldn't be able to do it. So I don't want that to be my issue, that's your issue. And secondly, the reason why I write for children is children don't care. They do not care. They just want a good story, maybe with a flying dragon and a wizard boy, but they don't care. They don't care what you are as a writer, they just want to read a good story. So I'm lucky enough to be in the world where I can write the story I want to, and the person reading it doesn't care who I am. So that's how I get around it. But the issues that you're highlighting, yes, it's in my books, and I will highlight it, but it's not the only issue. I'm never going to focus it as just the only issue.
I've got yet another note.
Coming on.
We have one more question. I'm just wondering if there's anybody upstairs, because I know in the morning people had questions upstairs and they didn't get a chance.
Hi, so as I was saying, you said something about how you focus a lot on being a chef, and you don't always try to define that as whether it's a woman chef or a man chef, etc. And I completely resonate with that. However, I've seen in a lot of rooms, this comes up often that when you are a female in a profession where it is not as common for females to be and you are standing out and you make it a point to say that or to show that, it is also taken negatively where you are trying to enforce that you are different whereas every other female can do the same. On the other hand, there are females who embrace it and they say, yes, I do make it a point that I am a female chef first rather than just being a chef, because it makes a difference that I am the only woman in the room. As a girl who's still growing up and someone who's still trying to understand that how much does it matter when in a profession, even as a girl, it's not as common for you to see other females, should you always focus on the fact that if I have made it, everyone else can? Or the fact that, yes, I have, but I also acknowledge that there are many more females who struggle in more layers, and this should be addressed, and that distinction should be important, that yes, I am a female who is a chef. This is more out loud of thinking of which way should we as feminists or females should think and progress forward for other females to think and identify us.
Okay, we got your question, thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to answer your question really briefly in a couple of parts. Yes, absolutely, I think of myself as a chef first because that's my job, that's my role. Everything that defines you, whether that's your gender, whether that's your the stage of life you're going through, whether that's incidences that have happened in your life, and anything compounding to that. Being a mother when I entered this world is my authentic experience. Being a, having the cultural identity I did, having the food that was on my table, everything that led me on my journey lets me tell my story as an artist, as a chef, as someone in the culinary arts. So yes, being a female does give me a different perspective, and it does actually, that's my unique point of view. But when I'm in my role and I'm working those long hours, I can't stop to think, I can't carry this heavy pot, or I can't, pull my weight because I'm a girl or I'm a female. That you do your job. It's heads down, thumbs up, and you just, play your part, and you're a cog in this wheel, and that's what I love about being a chef. The focus is on the work, and the focus is on sort of the creativity, but the labor of it, and I just love completely disappearing and immersing myself in that. And so I think that's why it's brilliant that I get to do what I do without having to think about who I am. I'm not conscious in that moment of being female or male or having a certain ethnic background. But yes, my perspective will always play a role in that. And as feminists, as you were saying, should we worry about the place that I take? Knowingly or unknowingly, this is something that, knowingly or unknowingly, the responsibility did, I guess, having underrepresentation of Bengali and Bangladeshi people on a global platform. A lot of responsibility suddenly landed on my shoulders that I wasn't ready for. And so you have to pull up your socks and you have to get yourself by the bootstraps and decide what things mean to you, what it means to you to be a woman in this situation, what it means to you to be a Bangladeshi in this situation. This is something that landed on me, and I took that and I evaluated what are my values, what does it mean for me to see 10 more people to come in my place, what can I do for them, what doors can I open for them. So that's what I was always think going forward.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Kishore. Thank you, Anjali. Thank you, audience.